it is more, may not necessarily be more, but more diagnosed in boys than girls. Maybe girls are flying under the radar as a potential thought. The next thing is there's no known cause or cure. And I want to keep in mind throughout this presentation, autism spectrum is a very large spectrum. So there are some individuals where their autism impacts them so greatly and their parents and their families that they hate autism. They hate it, and they would do anything for a cure for it. And then you have another part of the spectrum where the individuals and their families and their friends, they love their autism. And if offered a cure, they probably would deny that. They love what makes them unique and special. And so there is a very large spectrum out there. So I hope also from this presentation, you will understand that there's every individual is completely an individual, and one idea may work for one and not another, and vice versa. And with that, that goes into fact 3, that no two persons with autism spectrum disorder are alike. ASD is vastly different amongst each individual. And lastly, early intervention is key. And I included that fact because when we think of early intervention, we think of our preschool years, right? Our birth to 5 time. But even as you enter school age, like all intervention, is still good. And you guys are providing that intervention. You're working on the skills that each individual is lacking in, and you're helping to improve them continually. And so be encouraged that you are vital to each of your students' success. Okay, so here it is. What is autism? So in a very brief explanation, autism spectrum disorder is a complex developmental disability. It impacts the social interaction, their verbal and nonverbal communication, and demonstrates unusual or restricted activities or interests. So that's like your students, that might be engaging in self-stimulatory behavior. Maybe they're flapping or head nodding, or just things that are unusual, or highly interested in only one area, overly interested in something. So that's what that refers to there. These signs of autism typically do appear during the first 3 years of life, between birth to 3. However, it's very, very common that individuals are not formally diagnosed or identified with autism until they reach school age or even later. And there's lots of theories and ideas about why that is. Sometimes because autism is such a spectrum, you'll especially see a lot of the children that are the oldest child in their family. They may take longer to get diagnosed because parents may not realize that some of the behaviors that they're seeing are not typical until they reach school, and then they realize, oh, I guess my child should be talking more than what they are. Okay. So here's some characteristics that you might see in autism. A lack or delay in language. We talked about it impacts their verbal skills and language skills. Little or no eye contact. And also remember too, these are some characteristics that may or may not apply to any one individual. As you mentioned before, autism is a very individualized disorder. Not every single person is going to have the same exact characteristics. Okay. Repetitive language or motor mannerisms. These are kids who do the echolalia. They repeat everything they hear. Or there's also the kids who sometimes you might hear them, you might have a conversation with them, but maybe it feels scripted. They're saying, they're repeating maybe lines from a movie as part of that language impairment. Inflexible adherence to specific routines and rituals. I remember I had a student once who would throw a tantrum if his parents went a different way home. They had to go the exact same way home, past the certain landmarks, or he would throw a tantrum in the car. Persistent fixation on parts of objects. You might see this maybe in some of our MD rooms. You might see the kids that are fixated on a certain part of a toy, maybe the wheels, and they're constantly spinning the wheel and fixating on something. And also you might see this in your general ed classrooms, you know, with individual that is so fixated on a problem. Like I've had kids, you know, that erase and erase and erase and erase their worksheet because they have to write it perfectly, right? They're fixated on something. You might see lack of spontaneous or make-believe play. So in our preschool, these are the kids who maybe play the exact same way. They're not engaged with others in joint play. You see this on the playground. They're kind of doing their own thing. They're more engaged in parallel play maybe, and not necessarily in interactive play. And then immature or inadequate social skills. You know, very often there are things that you might see a child do or a student do. Like, why would they just go up and hit somebody? What are they doing? They may not know, they might not have the skill to ask for the pencil. You know, that they might need to learn that specific skill, things that we take for granted that most, you know, neurotypical, it's kind of just naturally pick up on those social cues. A lot of our kids don't always pick up on those social cues. Okay. And I found this video and I thought this was a really great perspective, and it had really good feedback on it about what autism is. And so I just want, it's only 4 minutes, so I wanted to share it with you.
Hi there, I am Wally. You may be wondering what I'm doing here. Well, let me start again. I am Wally and I am autistic. For those of you who are not familiar with this term, autistic is a person who suffers from a neurobehavioral condition called autism. But what exactly is autism? Well, it can be a tricky question because autism can be a lot of things. This condition is now being referred to as autism spectrum dysfunction because of its variety and diversity of symptoms. Quite possibly, my autism may be different from another autistic, and that his or her autism may also be different from another autistic, and so on. However, there are 3 basic symptoms that are observed in all types of autism. Social interaction challenges, deviant responsiveness and difficulty in communication, cognitive dysfunction and insensitivity or oversensitivity to certain stimuli including sight, hearing, smell, taste and touch, tendency to engage in repetitive behaviour throughout life on a daily basis. It may involve pacing, head rocking and hand flipping, etc. Now, let me evaluate myself according to these symptoms. I've never felt comfortable in social circles. I don't go out with friends or in gatherings, even though I have nothing else to do, and usually I feel out of place and panic in social gatherings. So, first symptom, check. I have trouble assessing how my words or actions will affect the other person psychologically. I have a really bad reputation for being blunt, and quite frankly, I have no idea why my words can hurt people. Most people tell me that I don't respond when I'm spoken to. I know that they're talking to me, but I feel a lot of background noise, which makes it hard for me to focus on one point during conversations with multiple stimuli involved. Along with that, sometimes I cannot assess the hidden meanings in conversations. For example, if I'm asked to take my seat, I would pick up my seat and ask, where to? So, second symptom, check. Since my childhood, I have a strong tendency for head rocking side to side. It calms me down. I have these episodes daily and quite often multiple times in the same day. So third symptom, big check. enough about me. Let's go through some important facts about autism. Autism is known to affect 1 in every 60 individuals, with boys at 5 times more risk to be autistic than girls. Quick question. Do you think the dominance of autism in males has something to do with their gender, more specifically with the Y chromosome? What causes autism is still unknown. It is believed that a cocktail of genetic, environmental, and psychological factors contributes towards autism. Autism is broadly divided into 3 major types. Classical or Kanner's autism, often referred to as severe autism. This type usually covers the low-functioning autism. In this case, autistics have the same but more severe symptoms, along with certain other developmental disorders, a very low IQ, loss of cognition, speech, antisocial behaviours and mental retardation in extreme cases. Asperger's syndrome, also called as high-function autism, tends to have the basic symptoms but with low severity, so that the individuals suffering from it have a very good chance of a normal life. Asperger's syndrome has known to be associated with high levels of IQ, with individuals that may lag in certain daily races of life, but are super smart at stuff that appears to be very difficult for smart but non-autistic individuals. These excellency may include problems in science, art, math and music, to name a few. Can you imagine someone who got the highest score in SATs twice, but can't ride a bicycle properly, and gets confused in easy tasks, like opening a push or pull door? The third type, also known as pervasive development disorder, or atypical autism. It usually involves more sociological and behavioural associated deviations, and is a rather less studied type of autism.
Okay. Why did I make this small again? Oh, there we go. Okay. Now I'm back to the PowerPoint. Okay. So here we go. So now let's consider our students with autism. You know, I know this is a nation for instructional assistants and throughout the school district. So we probably have many different, I might be in very different classrooms, whether it's, you know, the MD rooms versus the gen ed rooms versus, you know, and all in between. So let's think about the students that you currently are working with at your school. The video discussed 3 types of autism. So the first I want to focus on is that classic autism or severe autism. These are probably students that you're seeing in your MD classrooms. One thing in the video talked about is IQ, and it's really important to note, they mention a potentially low IQ in your kids with severe autism, and they may, but in the autism spectrum, their IQ is separate from their autism. So it follows a natural bell curve. So most students with autism have a very average IQ. Some have high intelligence in some areas, and some are very impacted intellectually and have an intellectual disability. And that's true in our MD room. So a child can have severe autism and actually have an perfectly average IQ or even a high average IQ, but sometimes their autism, some of those social deficits, those communication deficits, and other ritualistic, rigid behavior can sometimes impact their ability to access learning. Okay, so I want to actually go back, thinking about having in mind the student with severe autism. I want to go to our characteristics. So when we think about the student with severe autism, most of our MD classrooms, you know, you're very likely to see that lack or delay in language. maybe nonverbal, or even if they're verbal, maybe not communicating effectively, right? Maybe repeating words, or responding in a inability to have a conversation, right? Little or no eye contact that may impact. The biggest way eye contact might impact is if the perception is they're not paying attention. So, but eye contact can be very difficult for some of our students with autism, even our kids in the general education classroom. And so we need to think about what are other ways that we can gain their attention without them giving direct eye contact. Repetitive language, those motor mannerisms, if they're flapping or nodding, he mentioned in the video, for him, it's a calming, it calms him. And so in the past, when I first started working autism, it was a big deal. We tried to stop those behaviors because they were odd, they were, unusual. Somebody was doing something that looked strange in public, and we had a lot of parents who I don't want him flapping in public. I don't want him doing these things. And research has come to show that that's very, very hard on that student, that individual, though, that those motor mannerisms sometimes is a very calming mechanism for them. And so we now try to, not stop those necessary behaviors as long as it's not hurting themselves. Obviously, motor mannerisms that are include hurting yourself, self-injurious, we do want to stop that. But something that's not hurting anybody, not hurting themselves, and if it's a calming strategy, that's okay. We might see that inflexibility, right, to specific routines and rituals. Thinking about in our MD rooms, a lot of the kids who, just fall out of their chair, just completely out of sorts because something changed in the environment. They missed the bus, that day, and it just ruined the entire day, right? We probably have seen that. That fixation on parts of objects, just wanting to be fixated on something. We see that in the MD room right there, right? With sometimes staring, I mentioned earlier, like with toys, like spinning wheels or just being fixated on something. Lack of play. I've heard a lot of times in the MD rooms, I don't know what they want. I don't know what to give them. They don't want anything. This child doesn't want to play with anything, that lack of skills. And when we think about too, those of you that are coming from preschool or have worked in daycares, you're probably very familiar with play is the child's way to learn, right? That's how kids learn, is through play. So if you struggle in play, that can impact so many things later on. So it is really important to continue to work on those play skills, on exploring things. And lastly, immature, inadequate social skills. In the MD room, a lot of things are just so unaware of what's appropriate. They're running around the room sometimes just because they don't know they're supposed to be sitting. Most kids typically, we follow a social norm. We look around, we see what others are doing, and we're like, oh, okay, that's what everybody's doing. Okay, I have to sit here. That's typical. But some of our kids, if they have those social skills impairments, right, they're not looking around to their peers for what to do. They're just doing what they think is fine. So sometimes just they don't know what to do. Okay. And then the second one, I'm going to lump together with the Asperger's and the PDD. These are our kids that are in all the classrooms. They may be in the MD rooms. They may be in high incidence rooms. They may be in general ed rooms. They may not even have an IEP. This is that wide spectrum of autism. And I do have the chat up, and I see somebody had a question about why do we push academic versus functional skills. Really, I can't necessarily answer that as a whole. I would hope that everybody is working on skills for that individual and what's best for them. Sometimes I think especially it gets blurred as they get older. I think maybe that's where too you might be referring to is when do you switch over from those academic skills versus those functional skills, right? The hard part of autism, because it is such a wide spectrum of needs and abilities, and like I mentioned earlier, that IQ, that bell curve, there are some kids who may present at 4, 5, 6, 7 years old as being severely delayed, having, not having a lot of skills. And sometimes if they build up some of those basic foundational skills, you may see, oh my goodness, we can teach them how to read. We can teach them how to do something. And so it's really important to focus on the individual and really look at where they're at. Sometimes trying to merge the two together is like, I would encourage, trying to make while it's an academic base, make it meaningful, so at a young age, or if they're working on letter recognition, letters that are very useful to them, the letters of their name, they're going to see their name along with them writing their name. So focusing on those letters, understanding what that means. So sometimes there's a way to kind of merge the two. But again, I would just encourage you to think of the individual and work on where they're at. And sometimes building some of those foundational, what we call functional skills, will sometimes lead you to be able to work on more academic skills.
That's a really good suggestion, Erin. We have a question in the chat as well. Amina asks, some parents may ask if autism is a mental problem. What answers should we give them? And thanks for that question, Amina.
That's a really good question. I would encourage, it's a developmental disability, and there are things, obviously it is a neurological disorder, right? So there is, and you can find videos, there's actually great videos about the brain and autism. So in that sense, a mental problem, but there are things that we can work on physically. So I don't know if the question is, if it's a mental problem, do you treat it, with medication? And that's a question for their doctor. But there are things that we can do instructional wise to work on what we see. For example, with their communication, let's say communication, there might be, typically a typical baby, who does not have autism is paying attention to the people around them, are so focused on language, and they're listening and they're observing, and they try out sounds, and they get that feedback back, and it's this social interaction, right? The babies with autism, sometimes just because of their lack of social skills and social development, they're not necessarily paying attention to language, or not paying attention to those social cues, or not getting that feedback that neurotypical babies might be getting. And so what we can do though is work on communication strategies, right? They may communicate they may end up communicating with verbal language, or they may end up communicating through pictures and working on receptive language, and we work on those skills and they can learn that. So in that sense, it's something we can definitely work on and build up those neurons firing in those areas. But back to what you would talk to a parent about, I would encourage them to look at resources in the community, if they want to learn about parenting their child with autism through Nationwide Children's. They have these free parenting courses that they can provide, and they can talk to their doctor about what resources and interventions they may be able to access, outside of public school. And for us, just continue to say, we're going to continue to work on how their autism is impacting them at school. And we're going to work on the skills that we see he needs to work on or she needs to work on at school as that. Hopefully that helps. Okay, where are we at? Okay, so what can you expect from your students with autism? Like we mentioned, there's a wide range. But generally, whether you have students in the general education classrooms or you have students that are in the MD classrooms, they all probably have some type of challenge in one of these three areas, right? And the first is communication. So you should expect to have some challenges with either communicating to your student effectively, or your student struggling to communicating with you, or most likely both, right? So these are kids, even if they do communicate verbally and you can have a conversation, there's probably still something, or maybe they can misunderstand what you're saying, right? That happens. Like in the video, the teacher said, okay, can you take your seat? And he's like, picks it up, where do you want it? So sometimes their communication deficit is understanding what we are saying. Sometimes some individuals with autism are very explicit in black and white in what they hear. Other times it may be they get preoccupied on different stimuli, right? So if you tell a student with autism, okay, we're going to go get your books now, come over and have a seat. We're going to get reading and we're going to do this because we have to learn this. We're going to do some, and you're just going on and on and on. They may get lost and not actually hear what the main point that you were trying to get to. So for some individuals, just being very concise, right, for them. And then you may also see in social skills, right? In social skills, you're probably going to have to work in some area socially with your student with autism. Even if they don't even have an IEP, there's likely going to come a time where there's going to be a social situation that they just didn't get the social cues of what's happening, needs to learn that. And obviously from kids in our MD rooms, learning every single social skill, they may not have the skill to sit down. They may not know how to wait. They may not know how to take turns, right? So we need to work on those things. And then lastly, rigidity. Understanding that many students with autism may be fixated or rigid about their routines, their wants, their needs, or their ideas. So if you know that your student has autism there and you start seeing them just being so belligerent about something, okay, this could be their autism getting in there, let me try to visualize this for them. Let me try to give them, take a breath, let's do some calming strategies, help them know that, okay, this is what's going to happen. This is what will happen next. And talking about helping them get through that. Let's see. Okay, so what I want to do is, okay, good. I think we're good on time. Okay, so how can I support my student with autism? Before I move on, I just wanted to review the chat real quick.
We've got We've got one comment that was just recently added, or
Okay.
question rather. Someone asked, some with Asperger's or mild autism do not function so well in regular classrooms. Most times can be or disruptive. Do you think such child should be moved to a special class?
After this overnight, if they don't cope. That's very, again, I have to go back to the individual and what they need. And I would encourage you to work with your team, the teachers, the psychologists that's there, if they have an IEP, I'm assuming the special education coordinator, the administrator, and figure out, are they best getting their needs met here? Sometimes they really can be successful. Sometimes we just need to figure out the best way to work with them. And those kids with the mild autism, the Asperger's that fall in that middle range, maybe they have that average to high IQ, that is really challenging. It's really, really challenging because you have your classroom, let's say when we think about moving to a special class, right? So we have, some of our MD classrooms, and these are individuals with severe autism that don't have a lot of language, that don't have a lot of, and so it may, they may not get their needs met socially. Maybe they would get their needs met in one area, but in other areas they may not. And so it's figuring out which one is the best for that student. And so that is very, very challenging. And so the first thing we like to do, from a behavior specialist standpoint, is trying to figure out, are we providing all the supports this child needs? Is it simply those social skills? If we just work on these social skills, if we work on these adaptive behavior skills, will they be successful? So, but it is very, very challenging. And I know sometimes it's very hard when the disruption happens and it feels like nobody's learning. I would encourage you, though, that the research is actually really clear. There is a balance, and I get it, but that when we do provide those supports in place and we have a good strategy, a good plan for that individual to meet their needs, actually the general education, the neurotypical students actually benefit very much when there is that inclusive classroom. There is a lot of support in the research for that. But the key, though, is meeting that student's needs. And so that can be a very challenging puzzle to figure out for sure. So let's look at some strategies now and see if some of these might be helpful, especially if you are in one of those situations with that. So let's look at the communication. So if you have a student with autism, and we'll think about in this case, in the general ed classroom, right? When you're communicating with that student, do you have their attention? Remember from that video, their brain sometimes focuses on the wrong stimuli. You're talking and 19 of the other kids are all paying attention to the teacher, but that one student might be focused on, there's a stain somewhere on a thing, there's his favorite toy is within reach, or he heard something else, or there's another kid that got a haircut that looks kind of different. And so he's not paying attention. So you may be competing with lots of different stimuli around you. So first ask yourself, do I have the student's attention? Then once you have their attention, when you're communicating with them, remember there could be that receptive language delay. That means understanding what we say, the words we use. So provide clear directions. Instead of giving a whole paragraph of why we're going to do this worksheet, just, okay, first, we're going to do this worksheet. Look, you can do it. You're going to write your name here, then you're going to write these words here, and then do this. When you're done, you can have Legos. right? So very clear, very precise directions. For some kids, just a first then may be helpful. First, the worksheet, then you're going to get Legos. Second or third are the visuals. Because sometimes you are competing with those other stimuli and you're trying to get their attention, sometimes visuals just help support that communication. So it could be you showing visuals that first then, or it could be visuals for them to communicate with you. For so many kids, even some of our students, who have language, who have vocal skills, it takes a lot, there's a lot of mini skills to communicate verbally. They have to think about what they want to say. They have to first think about what they want. Then they have to be able to know what that item is, say that item, and they have to be getting your attention so that you're hearing them do that. So sometimes if we can eliminate some of those steps by simply having a choice board or having lots of different visuals. I used to create, for one of my kids, I had like your typical choice board things, like Play-Doh, balls, Legos. But I also had one row of just like conversational things like, I'm tired, or I like your shirt, or I like your hair, because this one student would like to pull hair. And I realized after a long while, she was trying to just brush it, not really pull it. And so when I started okay, oh, you like my hair? Thank you. I like your hair too. And it really decreased that behavior. So sometimes having a way to communicate is very helpful. So I would encourage you to make lots of different visuals throughout the room. If the child can, read words, maybe it's written words. If they need pictures, then it's pictures. And they can point to what they want, just to communicate wants and needs with you. They may also have a really hard time generalizing skills. So we'll see kids who can do a certain skill, at home, but they're not doing it at school, or vice versa. They're doing it at school, they're not doing it at home, or they're doing it one-on-one, they're not doing it in the classroom. And part of that social skill where we actually have to teach everything, sometimes we actually have to teach it in a different environment. So you may work one-on-one, you've got the skill. Then you may, as you go into the larger group, okay, buddy, we're going to do this just like you did with me. We're going to do it now in the group. Okay, right, I'm going to call on you. And you have to practice that skill. And that goes right along with what we're talking about right now with the social skills, is that the first thing for social skills is teaching everything. Please don't assume that even the most ordinary basic things that a child can do it in this setting. You'll probably have to teach a lot of different skills. You're finding to teach your expectations. So your student may not necessarily be acting out. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they really don't have the skill. And so we have to teach it. And part of teaching it, one strategy is modeling it. Sometimes say, okay, do this. Okay, look, I'm doing this, do this. Some kids with autism, not everybody, because everybody's an individual, but some really start to understand if you start praising or reinforcing another student, you say, oh, look, Johnny's sitting down. Johnny, great job sitting down. Look, Bobby, he's sitting down. Do what Johnny's doing. Sometimes that modeling can really help for some of our kids. It gives them an example. Something you can look up on YouTube is video modeling. So if there's a skill that your student is just not doing, they're not sitting down, they're not sitting in their seats, they're not raising their hands. You could probably find on YouTube, if you put video modeling, raising hand, video modeling, walking in a line, and sometimes showing that video For some kids that are very visual, that need that, like almost a script of what to do, sometimes they will respond really well to those videos of what to do. And lastly, as part of your teaching, we have to reinforce it, right? We have to reinforce what they are learning. When something's not easy, we need to provide that extra motivation, right? That extra reinforcement might mean extra praise, or, sometimes, we don't even realize it, especially for something so mundane. We typically don't praise every single time a kid sits down or raises their hand, because that's the expectation, right? We don't need to praise it every time. But for some of our kids, they're really working on that. That's really hard for them. So we need to really spend extra time reinforcing them. One cue that's the adults can use, that we can use as teachers, is if you're correcting something a lot. If you find yourself, gosh, I have asked this kid 5 times already to sit down. Have you praised him 10 times for doing it correctly? Probably not, right? Because it's something so simple, but really, we should really be giving 4 times praise and reinforcement, positive words for every correction that we give. So if you find yourself correcting a lot, maybe try I need to really teach this, and then praise it when it's actually happening, reinforce it, find what's motivating that child. And then the last area that we were going to talk about with autism is that rigidity, right? That conformity to that routine. Okay, some ways we can help with this, that we can support that student, is, if they are a routine-oriented student, use that strength. Keep things very predictable. A lot of students, just they do it out of habit. It's so comfortable for them to do the same thing, have it in the same place. So really be mindful of the routines you have established and keeping them in place and to be predictable. Next is to plan ahead. Things aren't always, you can't always control every routine, right? Sometimes in the middle of nap time, the fire alarm goes off, right? You have to get up and get going. But if there's going to be something different, there's going to be a change, make sure to talk about it with your student, maybe as a class or maybe just individually, but plan ahead to allow time to process that change and prepare your student. Remind and reassure your student if they are expecting something. So if they are expecting, they always choose chicken nuggets at lunch. That is what they choose. And you get word that there's no more chicken nuggets today. They're not going to have any, talk about it. You know what? Hey, buddy, our choices are, hot dog or pizza, maybe chicken nuggets tomorrow, but today, pizza. And maybe even something really difficult. If that kid, that's going to cause a tantrum, that is just their favorite thing, they're not going to have it. Is there anything else you can put in its place that would be somewhat reinforcing? Even if it's something sweet, something that he doesn't normally get, hey, listen, but I know this is going to be really hard for you. This is a change, but I think I might have some fruit snacks. And so today it's going to be hot dog and pizza with a fruit snack. Lucky duck, you're going to get a fruit snack today. Try to plan ahead and be ready for that. Be prepared. And lastly, the visuals, for our kids that are so routine oriented and so rigid in things, they really might need those visuals to help reinforce those ideas that you've been talking about. One thing, if you are working on those calming strategies, because a lot of our kids with rigidity and those routines, they can throw some epic tantrums when that routine is disrupted. And we really need to help them learn how to calm down. but we can't really teach that in the middle of a tantrum, right? Because their brains just aren't ready to learn that at that moment. So we have to really practice. And I would, any of your students, that kind of, that you foresee have that high routine, high rigid personality, work on those visuals, work on those calming strategies in their calm state. Practice that. So when it does start to come up, when you start to see, there's a change coming, this is going to happen. Hopefully you've practiced it enough and reinforced it enough that they can do that with you in that moment. Okay, where are we at? We are at 3:07. Okay. Okay, so I just want to leave it now for questions. Also, if you're interested in learning more, I got a lot of the resources I use were from ocali.org. I would encourage you to go to www.ocali.org. There is a, if you scroll down, I'll show you, I have it up right here. If you scroll down on their homepage, there's actually an Autism Center link, and you can go there, and they have all kinds of like free resources, just classes about autism, different training, different strategies that you might. I actually did for my last PD for myself, I did the challenging behavior, expect success, and they had some really good resources there.